Well, I guess we'll go ahead and get started this morning. I know a lot of people are out for PTP and for campaign and for the fishing trip. So if people don't come back next week and we still don't have very many people, then I'll be offended. But for now, we're okay. Couple of housekeeping questions for the 3 of you that were in here last week. Number one, I did not just get an artistic twist in me the last 6 days. If you saw my slides last week, they were not this pretty. Big shout out to Katie, virtual shout out to Katie, for making these slides pretty because she said they were adequate last week and now they're pretty. Housekeeping item number 2, over there on the wall, we've already talked about it a little bit. Some of you already looked at it. There's 3 things. The first one being a list of atheistic challenges. We're going to cover those. We're going to cover most of those as we go throughout the quarter. The last section, where it's just the generic challenges, are going to be the last day of class, where we talked about last week that we're going to go over some generic atheistic common questions that they'll have and how to answer those. If there's a question that you've come across that's not on that list, send it my way. I'll make sure that we cover it, okay? Because I want this to be useful to you guys. The other 2 things that are up there are QR codes. You have one QR code to a Google Drive folder that is going to be a link to all of the slides and all of the outlines. So you have all of this information available to you. The other is a link to a YouTube playlist where I'm taking these slides and an audio recording of what we cover in class. So if you miss a week, you can catch back up. If we cover something really fast and you want to listen to it again, you can listen to it again. You have it for your future reference. I think that's it. Go back. I did not say to do that. I think that's all the housekeeping stuff for now. If I think of something, we'll get to it then. This week we're going over what I have labeled foundational arguments. We're looking at science and evolution in this quarter, and the reason that I chose the word foundational arguments is not necessarily because they're foundational to the evolutionary theory. It's not necessarily because they're foundational to our apologetics approach to this topic. They're foundational because they're foundational to science itself. You in here or out of here?
I'm out of here. Bye.
Nice. They're foundational because they're foundational to science itself. We're going to look at cause and effect. We're going to look at logic, order, and information. And all of these things are fundamental assumptions that are built into science. And so I just think it's funny that we're going to look later at various arguments we can make from science and how that proves God's existence. But it's funny to me that we can look at the foundational assumptions and concepts from which science then comes, and we can see that God has to exist. So that's what we're going to be tackling this morning, starting with the law of cause and effect. If you were here a month and a half or so ago, when Eli was teaching class, we discussed the cosmological argument. And I stumbled over the wording of the cosmological argument, and I said it's because I had another one in my brain. That's this one. It's very, very similar. There's a couple of distinct differences. I'm partial to this one. There's nothing wrong with the cosmological argument. I just like the punch that this one packs a little bit better. Starting out with the law of cause and effect, can anybody tell me what the law of cause and effect states?
States a law.
States a law. Do you know what the law says?
Something happens which in turn makes something else happen.
Okay, something happens which then makes something else happen.
Everything that has happened has been caused by something.
Everything that has happened has been caused by something. We're actually get really granular here with the definition. Every material effect must have an adequate antecedent or simultaneous cause. There's a reason we're getting this granular. What just happened?
Eli took over your thing.
Eli! This guy!
He's got do not disturb on.
This guy.
Eli, you're on the wrong one.
Got it.
I'm taking back over. I have a mind to take over his TV now. Okay.
Tell you.
The teens shall learn about the law of cause.
The teens shall learn about the law of cause and effect. Okay. We're going to get really granular here with this definition, and it's for a reason. It's not just because I want to be obtuse or anything. Before we get into what we can learn from this law, though, I want to make sure that we understand what we're saying. What does this word mean? Does anybody know? Because this is the one word that would confuse me if I didn't already know what this definition is.
Occurring before, right?
Occurring before. So every material effect must have an adequate before or simultaneous cause. Okay? And there's 3 main points that I want to draw from this. Three things that this law states. Number one is that the cause has to be before or simultaneous to the effect. You can't have an effect that was caused by something that happened after it. Pretty self-explanatory. Number two, you must have a cause that is adequate to explain the effect. Usually this is in terms of power, but there are other levels of adequacy that we could look at. Usually it's in power, though. And the third point is that the causes are only required for material effects. And this will be important here in just a second. Let's make sure that we understand the law of cause and effect and how it applies. Let's just assume that this chair up and flew across the room, crashing into that wall. Okay? That would be an effect. Could the cause of that effect be my firstborn child? No. Why could it not be my firstborn child?
You don't have a firstborn
I don't have a firstborn child. Now, if and when, however long it takes, I do have a firstborn child, it might be a possible cause for that effect. But at this point in time right now, it can't possibly be a cause for that effect. Could it be that a housefly landed on the chair and then the chair just went flying?
No.
No. Why?
Because the
Do what?
It's inadequate.
It's inadequate. The housefly landing on it is not enough. It's not powerful enough to explain the chair. It would be much more likely that Isaac, in a fit of rage, just came over here and flung the chair across the room than it would be for a housefly. It's simply not possible for a housefly to fling the chair across the room like that. Example number 2. Why is this not an issue? It's not material. By definition, God is not material, therefore the law of cause and effect doesn't apply. He's not an effect. He's not a material effect. The law of cause and effect doesn't apply to God. Does that make sense? Okay. This is literally a very common challenge that atheists will throw out. It's caught so many people off guard. It's usually a mic drop moment for them. It's not really that big a deal if you know how to deal with it. Okay? I want us now to think about the universe as a grand ultimate effect. And you can think about the universe like this because the law of cause and effect applies at the most minuscule quantum mechanics level, and it applies at the most macro level. So you can think about the entirety of the universe as an ultimate grand effect. What properties does the universe have? This is not a trick question.
space and matter.
Space and matter, right? So, first of all, it's material. It exists. It's something. There's another property that it has. It's bound by time. And there's proof that I don't think we're going to get into in this class because it takes a while and it's really only useful to make a point. It's true. If you want to see the proof, I'll show you the proof after. But if matter exists, time exists, and vice versa. You can't have one without the other. So the fact that the universe is the sum of every material existence, the universe, by definition, is bound by time. Okay?
And related material is finite.
Right. It's finite. But it's finite, but it's huge. The universe is massive. Like, we can't even begin to comprehend how massive the universe is. There's a video, it's like a 20-minute video, and 19 and a half minutes of it is just showing and demonstrating just how big the universe is. The punchline of the video, the last 30 seconds of it, is zooming back in on Earth after having shown how massive it is and saying, and God created all of this with an afterthought, and He made the stars also. It's amazing just how big the universe is. And there's probably more that we could go through here, but I think this is sufficient to make the point that we want to make. The properties of the universe are that it's material, bound by time, and that it's massive. Given the law of cause and effect, then, what can we conclude about the cause of the universe as an effect? Well, if it's material, the cause cannot have been material. If it's bound by time, the cause cannot have been bound by time. And if it's massive, then the cause must have been immensely powerful in order to be adequate enough to explain the effect of the universe. Does this align? Given our naturalistic atheistic assumption, does what we've seen so far align with this? And for those of you who weren't here last week, or for those of you who were, what does this mean? This naturalistic atheistic assumption?
That things were, always will be, and always was and always will be not God, without God.
Right. So the naturalistic assumption is that there's no supernatural, only the material world exists, atheistic being that there is no God. So we're going with this assumption in this class. We're saying, okay, let's assume that naturalistic atheism is true. Does stuff break? Because if it ever breaks, if there's ever, say, a scientific law that is broken, that's inherently a supernatural event. So if we find a scientific law like the law of cause and effect that breaks, that doesn't make sense with naturalistic atheism, that means that either naturalism or atheism, probably both, are false. Okay? So back to the question, given what we have now known about the law of cause and effect, does this align with our naturalistic atheistic assumption? No. Because what we know about the law of cause and effect says that an immaterial, timeless, spaceless, massively powerful something has to exist to cause the universe as the grand effect. That would inherently be unnaturalistic and probably theistic. This does not align with the assumption. This is evolutionary scientist Robert Jastrow. He's a NASA astronomer, planetary physicist, and cosmologist. He kind of knows what he's talking about. He said this: the universe and everything that has happened in it since the beginning of time are a grand effect without a known cause. An effect without a known cause? This is not the world of science. It is a world of witchcraft, of wild events, and the whims of demons, a medieval world that science has tried to banish. As scientists, what are we to make of this picture? I do not know. Because they're not going to follow the evidence where it leads. If they follow the evidence where it leads, that leads them to God. And they don't want to believe in God. They want the naturalistic atheist assumption to be true. But it just breaks. Okay? If we follow only the evidence where it leads, the law of cause and effect tells us something about where the universe came from. It tells us that there had to have been a cause. Real quick as a side note, you cannot necessarily conclude from this that the cause had to be the God of Scripture. That's very important. Many people will take this argument, use it in evangelism, and say, yep, the God of the Bible has to exist because of the law of cause and effect, and you're going to get laughed at. That's not what we're concluding here. That's not the conclusion that this argument is making. The cause does have to be timeless, spaceless, and super powerful. It sounds a lot like the God of Scripture, but that's not necessarily what we're concluding. Remember, if you were here last week, we had an evangelism strategy up here that we're basing this class on. First, we're going to establish that a supernatural something has to exist. From there, from Scripture, you can show that that supernatural something has to be the God of the Bible. And then from there, you can show people's sin and their need for a Savior. We're in that first step. We're establishing that something supernatural has to exist. It's not necessarily God. It could be. But something has to exist. We're defeating atheism. We're not proving Christianity. Okay? Based on the law of cause and effect, the universe has to have a cause. Now we move on to logic and order. These are kind of fun. Start with logic. Logic is a fundamental assumption in science. It's the idea that things can be studied. Because, take a step back here, without the assumption of logic going into it, how would we know that things could even be studied? Why would we begin to think that there's a process that we could learn about? It's not inherent to the physical existence. There doesn't have to be a process, but we just assume that there is a process. We assume that things can be studied. We assume that we're going to be able to understand those things, that the way that things are ordered, the processes that can be studied, will make sense to our brains. There's again the assumption that logic is built into how we're hardwired, and that that same kind of logic is built into how the universe operates. Again, there's nothing in matter that would dictate that. There's nothing, there's no rule or no law that says that. It's just an assumption that we have. It's the idea that processes and experiments will be consistent within science. If somebody does an experiment over here, you can repeat that experiment, get the same result. The processes will be consistent. This comes from the law of cause and effect. It stems very closely from that given an effect, one should be able to study and find and define the cause, and that there should be a logical process from the cause to the effect that we can identify. So what is logic from y'all's perspective? If you had to define it, what is logic? There's no right or wrong answer. There's some wrong answers. There's no right answer here.
A conclusion or a process a person comes to identify or understand something.
Okay, I like it. And that's actually going to be the second definition that we look at. The first one, it's immaterial truth in our universe. The fact that things are true comes from logic, and true things tend to be logical. Really important, though, it's immaterial. There's nothing material, physical about I've never stubbed my toe on logic. Right? There's no real reason that logic should exist because it's immaterial. Something else has to be the source for logic. And then the second definition is very close to what you were saying. It's the internal rules and processes upon which an intelligent mind operates. Intelligent mind does not mean super smart. Even the dumbest people you know have an intelligent mind. Okay, animals have intelligent minds to an extent under this definition. It's the internal rules and processes upon which an intelligent mind operates, which leads us to psychonomy, which is the study of the rules that regulate the inner workings of the brain. So if we go with that second definition, where logic is the internal rules and processes on which an intelligent mind operates, that would be what this is. Psychonomy is the study of logic, essentially. And within the study of psychonomy, there is a term, and if you Google this term, you probably won't find very much because it's that niche, but the term is psychonomogenesis, and it states that the laws and principles that govern a mind cannot originate from matter and random chance, or random chance. So, under our naturalistic atheistic assumption, if atheism is true, if logic cannot arise from matter and random chance, but matter and random chance are all that exist, should logic exist? No, this is not a trick question. Funnily enough, the very framing of that question is itself a logical premise and conclusion. But no, logic shouldn't exist, right? If logic cannot come from matter and random chance, but matter and random chance are all that exist, then logic shouldn't exist. Does logic exist?
Yes.
Yes, very clearly. So what can we conclude about our universe because logic exists?
There is no random chance. Or there is it's not all
It's not
random
all
chance.
matter and random chance. There's a systematic way that we can think about it. Go for it.
I'd say you'd have to conclude that there are immaterial things.
Yes.
Like, you have to conclude that if you believe that logic exists. And so that the fact that logic does exist defeats the naturalism part.
Right.
Itself.
And to some extent the atheism part. But
Sure.
there's a systematic way that we can think about this. And again, if we think about this as a logical couple of premises and then a conclusion, if logic can't arise from matter and random chance, but that's all that exists, then logic shouldn't exist. But logic does exist. If we disagree with the conclusion that logic shouldn't exist, then one of the two premises have to be wrong. This part's a scientific law. I'm not about to argue with the scientific law. Logic cannot arise from matter and random chance. The only other variable here is this one, that matter and random chance are all that exists. If we don't like the conclusion that logic shouldn't exist because logic does exist, then one of the two premises has to be wrong. And the most logical premise to be wrong is the assumption that matter and random chance are all that exists. It's the same point. It's a systematic way of thinking about it. Given the fact that there is logic in our universe, that tells us that there must be more than matter and random chance in our universe. Pointedly, naturalistic atheism is an incorrect assumption. And then order. It's very similar to the idea of logic. There's also order in our universe. Everything seems to be just so. in our universe. We're going to get to explore a lot more on that later, probably when we look at life, definitely when we look at math. Various aspects of our universe are intricate and complex. For example, DNA. If we think about DNA as in data storage terms, DNA is far beyond anything that we have in modern technology. We've come a long way in modern technology. We have phones and computers that can store a ton of DNA, or a ton of information. Not a ton. Technically a ton of DNA, but it doesn't really work that way. It can store a lot of information, but even the most high-tech technology that we have comes nowhere close to the data storage that we have in DNA. And the only reason that DNA is as cool as it is because it's so intricate and complex, and that comes from the order that we see in our universe. Okay? There's a ton of order in our universe. And so I want to ask two very reasonable questions, I think, at least. You can disagree the reasonableness of the questions if you want. Number one, how did things get to be so orderly? Notice, we're not assuming that things had to have a supernatural cause to be so orderly. If we discover that things could get orderly naturally, cool, then throw the argument out the window. But if we discover that things can't become orderly naturally, then under our naturalistic atheistic assumption, does the order in our universe make sense? That's how we're going to approach the topic of order. According to naturalistic atheism, defaulting to evolution, which is kind of two ways of saying the same thing that's needlessly complicated. It's fine. How did the universe begin according to evolution?
Big Bang.
The Big Bang. Big Bang, bang, meaning things go boom, explosion. Okay? I'm going to argue that an explosion is akin to chaos. Technically, mathematically, chaos would be random, and so since there's an explosion, there's a point from which stuff then goes, so it's not truly random, but you can't really argue that an explosion is orderly. Okay? So from that perspective, an explosion would be akin to chaos. Can order ever come from chaos?
No.
You say no? I would actually argue it could. Okay, so there's some disagreement here.
A random chance.
From random chance. Order could come from chaos and random chance. And we'll see why here in just a second. But specifically, can the highly intricate and complex order that we have come from any level of chaos? No. Okay, and I would agree with that. So this one, sure, maybe. This one, definitely not. Okay, we'll see that with a couple of examples. Starting with this one. Hopefully nobody was super traumatized by these as a kid. I wasn't, so we're going to use these. I didn't go out and buy them. Probably should have. That would have made this experiment a whole lot more fun and a little bit more messy. Let's assume that we had 26 magnet letters with us this morning, and we had a big bowl. We put them all in the bowl, and we shook them up and randomized it, and then we threw them up in the air and let them fall to the ground. And let's assume that they landed in alphabetical order. That'd be pretty cool, right? Could that happen? Technically speaking, probably wouldn't ever happen.
Bet on it.
Right? No, yeah, I wouldn't bet on it at all. Mathematically, defining something as impossible is kind of difficult to do. We will get to that later. But it's kind of difficult to do. This could be mathematically possible. It could happen like that. Okay? Two questions, though. How much order would be produced in that example? Just them lining up in alphabetical order. How much order is that?
Absolute.
Okay, absolute. It's a little bit of order. Right? It's nothing compared to DNA. Right? Because the order that we see with the intricacy of DNA is so complex. 26 letters in a row. It's impressive. Would never happen, right? But it's not really that much order. How much chaos was involved in producing that order in our example?
Including the failed attempts?
Including just the one attempt. Putting it in the bowl, shaking it up, throwing it up, letting it fall. How much chaos is that?
Throughout,
Say what?
Throughout the entire process, it was chaos. I mean, completely random.
Chaos throughout the entire process, but it's not an explosion.
No.
It's not a ton of chaos.
Comparatively.
Right? So, a little bit of order and a little bit of chaos. A little bit of chaos producing a little bit of order. It would never happen, but it's technically mathematically possible. Okay? What about this example? Spoiler alert, this is not my room. This has never been my room. It might resemble my room in the past, might resemble my room now. This is what I got on Google from Googling teen boy room messy. This was just the highest resolution photo I could find. Let's analyze this photo here for a second. We have a bed that's probably not been made since the bed was put into the room. We have, I don't even know how much trash that is. We've got a laptop in the chair. It seems to be very old from the thickness of it and the charging cord. We've got some papers in the chair, which is probably some homework. I don't even know what we've got on the desk. We've got clothes all throughout the room. We've got, on what I assume is a beanbag chair, we've got clothes that have probably been worn a lot, and they're on their last leg. They're on the really dirty side. You might get one more use out of them. We've got clothes in the floor. Those are dirty. Don't touch those. We've got clothes over here in a chair seeming to be folded or wadded up. That's probably, they've been worn once. You can get some more use out of them. We've got cable management that would be painful for any tech person to look at, so I'm not going to even touch on that. We've got what appears to be at least 2, probably 3 different colors of towels, which is probably 4 months worth of shower towels for this teen boy. We've got a lot of chaos in this room. Let's say that we took all of the stuff, piled it in the center. We took all the clothes, we took the computer and the homework, we took the sheets off the bed, the pillow, the blankets. Let's just bring the bed, let's bring the chair and the desk and the other chair and pile everything in the center of the room. Stick a couple of sticks of dynamite underneath it, light those sticks of dynamite on fire, go a safe distance away and let the thing explode. Okay? When we come back from that safe distance, we find the bed to be back where it was. The sheets washed, dried, and put on the bed made impeccably. We see the trash has been properly disposed of. We see the computer that's not only not destroyed, it's got upgraded parts. We see the homework that's done, and not just done for a passing grade, but done for extra credit. All of the clothes and the towels have been washed, dried, ironed, and properly put away, whether folded and put in the dresser or hung up in the closet. The floor has been cleaned like it's never been cleaned before. Everything is spotless. Now, would that ever happen? Ever? This isn't even math here. This is an explosion can't upgrade your PC parts, right? This is just not how explosions work. Explosions take whatever minuscule amount of order exists and throws it into disarray. So this would never, ever, ever happen, but let's assume that it did. How much order did we produce? A ton more than just 26 magnet letters. Not as much as DNA, but a ton more than just 26 magnet letters. How much chaos did we have to go from to then produce that order?
Same answer.
A ton more chaos than just mixing up 26 magnet letters and letting gravity do its work. So, a little bit of chaos, producing a little bit of order, probably never going to happen, but it could happen. A lot of chaos, producing a lot of order, especially by means of an explosion, never going to happen. Ever. Okay? Remind me again, what does evolution demand? Everything started with the Big Bang. It's a massive explosion that took all matter and random particles of our universe and somehow turned it into the orderly system that we see. How much order did the Big Bang allegedly produce?
A godly amount of order.
A godly amount of order. Given that we could theoretically define the universe as everything in existence, you might say that evolution by the Big Bang would have had to produce the maximum amount of order. Okay? How much chaos would have been needed to produce that order? The maximum amount of chaos, because every particle in existence exploded. Does this make sense? Given what we know about chaos producing order, can we ever have the maximum amount of chaos produce the maximum amount of order? This doesn't make sense. Order can never come from chaos. Maybe it mathematically could in a tiny example, but not to the degree that evolution demands. We look at a building and we know that it has to have a builder. We look at a book and we know that it has to have an author. And we look at the extreme order and the apparent design in our universe, and we know that that has to be due to something or someone putting everything in order. It can't come from random chance. Last thing we're going to look at this morning is information. Information is going to be fun. I'm excited for this one. There is a ton of information all around us in our universe, not just design, because design can tell us that there has to be a designer that we just briefly talked about a second ago. Not just the fact that there's design, not just the fact that everything's finely tuned, because if everything is finely tuned, that gives us some information about where everything came from, who finely tuned it, gives us some information there. I'm talking actual information in our universe. Again, we can look at DNA as an example. DNA contains all sorts of very specific information about an individual. From conception, from the time that new DNA is formed, there's very specific information about height, about hair color, proclivities to certain illnesses, proclivities to baldness, all sorts of things. My question, two reasonable questions. Where did this information come from? And if it couldn't come from natural origins, then under our naturalistic atheistic assumption, does the information in our universe make sense? Okay? In order to be consistent, the naturalistic atheist would have to find some sort of natural process to produce information. If there's nothing more than the natural material universe, there has to be some sort of natural process that produces information. This guy, his name is Stephen Meyer. He was an evolutionist. He's now a creationist. If you've never heard him talk before, have a Red Bull or something before you listen to him. He talks over my head sometimes. Brilliant guy. He said this: there isn't a single example anywhere in the history of the universe in which information came from anything other than an intelligent source. Does he leave much wiggle room there? No, not even a little bit of wiggle room. This guy is Paul Davies. He was a pantheist, but after studying the evidence, he became a Christian. He's a scientist, he's an astrophysicist, astrobiologist, and theoretical physicist, and he, among many other things, but this is the most relevant part of the quote, said, "There is no known law of physics able to create information from nothing." And technically these are true. I'm not going to argue necessarily that these are true. But because of a tiny technicality, they're actually not fully correct. And the last thing that I want to do is to give you guys quotes like this for you to use and then find out in action that they're technically inaccurate in the tiniest of senses. So we can actually do better. In order to do better than just these two simple quotes, we have to take a slight information theory detour and look at the 5 levels of information that exist. Okay? The first time that I heard this was in a video form by a guy named J. Warner Wallace. If you've ever heard his stuff, phenomenal. He's a cold case detective by trade. He was an atheist, staunch atheist. He solved a ton of cold cases, cold homicides where there's no leads, there's no real active evidence, and he took what little was there and was able to convict people. As an atheist, he said, I'm going to do the same thing to the New Testament. He said, I'm going to disprove the resurrection as a cold case detective. Spoiler alert, became a Christian. So, brilliant guy, has done a whole bunch of apologetic stuff, and he gave this example using his dog. I don't know his dog. I'll use my dog. And he said if we were to take my dog, Sophie, and put her at a computer and just let her type away, what would be produced? Randomness. The lowest level of information. Statistics, okay? Probably something about like this. Now, is that information?
Yeah.
It's sort of. Don't ask me what it's saying. I can't tell you what it's saying. Like, this is just gibberish, but technically this is information. Okay? Statistics can also be something like this. Very basic patterns. Now, if Sophie would sit down and type this out at a computer, that's pretty impressive. I got a pretty smart puppy if she can do that. But it's not really information. I don't really know what this is saying. Even more complex patterns like this. Like, I could quantify this, like maybe after enough times if the pattern changed or if the pattern remained the same, there's some sort of statistical analysis that we could do there. It doesn't really tell us much just from the information, though. Okay? You can get this from natural processes. There are natural scientific processes and reactions or whatever that will get you hodgepodge information, will get you simple patterns, will get you complex patterns. Technically speaking, this is information. So you can technically get information from natural sources. But that's about it. You're probably not going to get the next level of information, which is syntax. Now, if Sophie were to sit down at a computer and type this, I'd be parading her around. I'm going to get rich off of this, but this is a smart dog. Now, again, I have no clue what it's saying. These are a couple of fragmented phrases at best. But this is next level information. See what I did there? That was funny. This is next level information. Some people will argue that you can get this from natural processes. Most atheists wouldn't even, but some technically would. You're definitely not going to get the third level of information, which is semantics. I really wish he was in here. This is going to not be as impactful. It's okay. Semantics. If Sophie were to sit down and be able to communicate that Eli is eating, that's amazing, right? Not only does she recognize who Eli is, but she recognizes what he's doing, and she's able to communicate that. That's an insane amount of information to be able to communicate. Fourth level is pragmatics. Pragmatics can be thought about information that requests a response or an action. Okay? So we have random characters, we have characters forming words forming a thought requesting a response or an action. Okay? And the fifth level is very similar to it, apobetics. It's not just information that requests a response, but expects a response and is able to define a reason for the request. Okay? So Sophie would tell Eli, hey, let's eat because I'm hungry. It's not just synapses firing in her brain saying, I'm hungry, I want to get food. She's able to identify why she wants to eat. Okay? This is the highest form of information. There are 5 different levels of information. You can get this one from natural processes. Could say you can get this one. You definitely can't get any of these. Okay? But what kind of information do we have? In general, we do have all 5 levels of information in our universe. We have the lowest level. I don't even know what the information is saying. We've got small patterns. We do also have the highest level of information. And specifically, DNA is the highest level of information. Okay, because DNA can be thought of as a bunch of genetic requests to be carried out by the body for the body's function. Now, the specific nucleotides in the DNA might not know that that's why they're requesting that action, but the fact that they are requesting that action and the fact that the action is there at all is for a reason. And we can look at the information there and see that it is of the highest level of information. Some people might challenge that thought. Some people might say, well, how do we know that DNA is of the highest level of information? And there's actually a simple test that you can apply to figure out whether or not you have one of the higher forms of information. Here we've got the lowest form that we first looked at, and we've got the highest form, the last one that we looked at. And the simple test is I'm going to call it the character test. Can you add, remove, or change a character from the information and alter its meaning? So if I were to change this G to a B, does that change the information? It said nothing before, it says nothing now. Right? If I were to, I have 5 minutes, cool. If I were to remove this Q, would that change fundamentally what the statistical information is saying? No, right? Because it's not saying anything now, it's not going to say anything then. If I were to change this E to an A, does that change the information? Absolutely. All of a sudden, we're not talking to Eli, we're talking to Allie. Okay? Changing a character, removing a character, adding a character here fundamentally changes the information that's being communicated. And we can see this. Let's put this to the test. Let's remove even the smallest of characters. Let's just remove that comma. Okay? Has the information changed? Not really, right? Let's do the same thing down here. Let's just remove that comma. Has the information changed?
Gotten better.
Sophie went from the sweet girl that's just hungry and wants to eat the food to now she wants to eat Eli because she's hungry. What about DNA? If you just change a nucleotide in DNA, does something change? A lot can change. It could be that you go from having brown hair to slightly lighter brown hair. It could be a major genetic deformity. Probably cancer, right? No, it's like if you change even the slightest bit of the DNA in your body, something will change. It might be small, it might not really be noticeable, something will change. we know that DNA is of the highest level of information. Okay? So what can we conclude? If information, at least the highest level of information, cannot come from anything other than an intelligent source, if there's no natural process to explain information, but we do observe the highest level of information in our universe, then what does that say about the naturalistic atheistic assumption? It's wrong. It can't possibly be true. This guy's name is Werner Gitt. He's an engineer and information technology specialist. He's actually the guy that wrote the book on the 5 levels of information. He's going to know what he's talking about here. And he says this: a necessary requirement, not just hypothetical, not just possible, a necessary requirement for generating meaningful information, which is what we have in the form of DNA, is the ability to select from alternatives, and this requires an intelligent volitional entity. Unguided random processes cannot do this, not in any amount of time, because the selection process demands continuous guidance by an intelligent being that has a purpose. Got my plurals mixed up there, that's hilarious. By an intelligent being that has a purpose. If we have meaningful information in our universe, it is necessary then that we have an intelligent, volitional being that has a purpose to put the information in our universe. Simply the fact that we have DNA and there's information in DNA, there's information in all sources, or in all sorts of different parts of our universe, simply the fact that we have information shows that there has to be a source for that information. So let's take it all in. I've got like 2 minutes left. Let's take it all in. What have we learned about our universe just from the foundational concepts of science that we've looked at? There has to be an immaterial, timeless, super powerful, logical being with a purpose to put everything as it is. By the assumptions baked into the scientific method. We've not even looked at scientific laws really yet. We're going to get there next week when we look at matter. We're going to get there in a couple of weeks when we look at life. We're going to look at math. We're going to look at actual applications of scientific laws and how those show that God exists. But just by looking at the assumptions that go into the process that then produces the laws, we can see that something has to exist and that naturalistic atheism has to be incorrect. I hope that's as cool to you guys as it is to me. That's all I've got. Are there any questions, comments, concerns, complaints, points of confusion, anything I can clarify? Cool.
I just kind of think of, I've always, this has just kind of been in my mind for a few years now.
Yep.
But I've taken some, like, I've unfortunately tried to learn Python.
Okay, yep.
But in the process of doing that, I understand, like, I come to understand, like, how every, like, in talking, like, I guess, video game, like, materials and terms, like, you have to code every single object, or at least put the object in an umbrella of stuff to know, or else the game isn't going to know what to do with it.
Right. Stuff's going to break. And to an extent, that probably applies to the universe. I don't know that there's... And y'all are scientists in here, y'all can correct me. I don't know that there's anything fundamental about existence that like has to be defined by some sort of code governing that. But the fact that there is information from the existence, we can learn that God has to exist. I don't know if y'all have anything on that you want to add.
One could say that life is the most complex game that has ever been created.
One could say that. One could question why it is that we're trying to get around the fact that there has to be a coder for the game. Well, thank y'all for your attention. I'll see most of you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brett.